All right, welcome everyone. We've got a lot of people registered for this today, and I'm sure they are trickling in now. So I'm just going to give everyone just a couple of minutes to get rolling in. But we got a lot to cover, and this should be a really exciting training. So I want to make sure that we jump right in and don't waste a lot of time. All right, Shelley, good. I'm glad you can now hear me. Again, we've got a lot of people registered for this, but I want to respect your time, especially those who arrived on time. So we're just going to take 1 or 2 minutes, just get situated, get your coffee, and we're going to dive in here in about 1 minute. If you're having any technical issues, now's the time to jump on chat. Of course, most of you by now are probably familiar with Zoom. I think we've all been trained on Zoom here in the last couple of weeks. Of course, this is a Zoom webinar feature. It's a little different than your normal Zoom, but for those of you watching at home, and you're all watching from home, this is pretty much the same as being in a normal Zoom meeting, except that you're only seeing me. So it's a webinar format. I can, I believe, include some of you guys on video, but since I am not technically the admin of this, Pinellas Realtor is, best thing is probably just any questions you have, throw it in the chat, which says it's called Q&A. So if you look at your options button there, you've got the Q&A feature. Any questions you have, you can throw in there, and I will try to get to them. For us to spend 2 hours together with me droning on about emotional intelligence, no matter how helpful, applicable, and even entertaining it may be, it can get difficult to sit for 2 hours without some interaction. As most of you know who have attended my trainings before, they tend to be very, very highly interactive. So I'm going to try to encourage us to interact in the chat. The best way to do that is to just get rolling, interacting now. So if you wouldn't mind, what I would encourage you to do is just go find the chat. It says Q&A. And type in there what you're hoping to take away from today. I would love to hear why you thought this was a training worth attending so that I address those things, and it also gets us talking. So right there in the Q&A, if a couple of you could dive in there and just start typing what you're hoping to take away or why you're here, that would be great, and then we'll get started. All right, some great responses already coming in here. Be better at handling objections. Anything you could help with your career with. To be able to calm other people's fears, especially our customers and clients' fears right now, considering the economy, home values and prices, and no time like the present, for sure. That's right, Rachel. Good, all good stuff. So here's what I'd like to say. Thank you, and you can keep entering things in there. We will come back to those things. Here's what I'd like to say right at the beginning as kind of by way of introduction. As most of you know that have been following me for a while, my passion is training, specifically training entrepreneurs to make more money, but really to gain the freedom and the enjoyment from all that we do. Most people start their own businesses not simply with money in mind. They start their own businesses because they have a purpose and they want to have some control over that purpose. We usually most entrepreneurs prize freedom more than even money at times. The fact of the matter is that once we kind of get rolling with our businesses, the battle becomes one of fulfilling that purpose while maintaining that freedom. If we're doing a good job, the money may or may not be there, but the money can be there. The issue is, how do we get to that place we were hoping to get to, where it just kind of feels like a well-oiled machine? So anyway, that's why Stronghold Training exists. What I have learned after years of training is that no matter how well I train, no matter how good the information, no matter how well I give that information to other people, in the moment when they're trying to apply that information, their ability to do so is completely predicated upon their emotional intelligence. Let me give you a kind of an easy to understand example. One of the ones that came from the Q&A we just had. Let's say I do a how to handle objections training, and you get it. You understand my philosophy. You start, you develop some scripts. You practice it. You're ready to go. You're ready to slay a dragon of objections. And then you jump in and you hear an objection from a customer, but the stress, the pressure, all that comes to bear, and you just say something dumb. What happened? Was the training bad? No. What happened was your emotional intelligence kind of got in the way. By the way, that's normal. We understand that. Professional athletes understand this. I mean, really, do any of us wake up every day and go, I wonder why the NBA is still practicing? I wonder why the NFL goes to practice. Aren't they masters of the game? Well, sure they are. But they go to practice because they want to be prepared for the moment. Because in the moment, knowing what to do and even being able to prove what you do in practice isn't the same as in the game. It's different in the game. I have a military background, and in all my years when I was in the Navy, we drilled constantly. Why? Because when the stuff hits the fan, you don't want to be up here thinking. You just want your feet to be moving so your mind can be focused on other things. You want your feet to be moving in spite of the anxieties you're feeling. And so I say all that to say this. All great training is built on the foundation of emotional intelligence. We have got to learn this skill. And that's just the start. Emotional intelligence is so much more than that. It is so, it permeates everything that we do. What we're about to go through today is, in less than 2 hours, mind you, with breaks and with interaction, is really just a precursor to what we could get into with emotional intelligence. This is a lifelong study. Typically, even this course we're going through today, I would spread out over a minimum of 6 hours, not just 2. So because of that, I'm going to go really fast, and I'm going to try to hit the highlights. But I'm not just going to hit the highlights so you have more information. I really want you to be able to walk away today with things you can do right now, today, things you can do to begin growing in emotional intelligence. You're not going to go from zero to hero today. And you know what? You're not going to do that in the next 10 years. But I want to give you stuff today that you can leave this getting yourself closer and closer and closer to being that hero entrepreneur, that mentally tough, that emotionally intelligent entrepreneur that you can be. I say all that understanding that many of you are already emotionally intelligent. So we need to get into some definitions here right at the beginning. So let's dive right in. I think everybody that's coming is here. If anyone else joins late, that is fine too. So let me start off with a question. So true or false, people can and sometimes need to eliminate their emotions from their decision making. Go ahead, if you would, in the chat there and type your answer to that. I had some of you under the Q&A function earlier, and I didn't direct you to the chat. My bad. Zoom webinars are a little different than Zoom meetings. So you have both a Q&A function that you can type a question to me, and then you've got the chat function as well. Question came in, is there a handout today? No, but I am happy to send you these slides. I will get your email addresses from Pinellas Realtor Organization, and I will send these slides out to you so you'll have everything you need. All right, some of you are saying false, some of you are saying true. We got a good debate on our hands here. So chances are nobody's wrong. It's a little bit of a trick question and how it's worded. So if you look at the wording of the question, it's just designed to cause some good discussion. It says people can and sometimes need to eliminate their emotions from their decision making. what most of you that are saying true are probably really saying is, sometimes I need to not allow emotions to be a primary influence or a major influence in the decisions that I'm making. And that is true. The catch here is it says can eliminate. People can eliminate their emotions. And that is unfortunately not true, or I would say fortunately not true, that you can't simply eliminate all emotions. That said, again, all the people said true, understand that there's times in which we need to make primarily rational decisions and not primarily emotional decisions. So that part is true, but we cannot, unfortunately, eliminate our emotions. There's a popular school, well, it's not popular anymore, although it's coming back. It was done away with over 100 years ago, a school of philosophy called Stoicism. And the Stoics, though they may have had good intentions, they failed because you cannot eliminate emotions from rational consideration. And I think what we're learning today is that it is not best that we do. So let's get into this. Let's get into this a little illustration by my good friend here, Phineas Gage. So Phineas Gage was he was a railroad worker, actually a manager on the railroad a long time ago. We were paving the railroad, building the railroad out west. And what Phineas discovered was that you can't go around mountains. You have to kind of go through them. When you're talking about big mountain ranges like the Rocky Mountains, you just need to go through them. So he knew that. We all knew that. And the way they would do that is they would bore a hole in the side of the mountain, and they would pack it full of TNT, dynamite, and then they would put a little detonator in that, get a good safe distance, just kind of like the old cartoons did, and you hit the little lever, and boom, there goes the mountain. And they would blow tunnels through the mountain that way. Well, back then, good leaders, good managers didn't have resumes and letters of recommendation. They had reputations. And you got a good reputation of being a good leader by doing the tough work and by taking care of people. I wish it was the same today. You can't just doctor a resume and get a degree. Back then, you had to have a true reputation. Honor counted. So Phineas was a great leader. So he did this tough job. So they had the TNT packed there in the mountain. And Phineas here took this 5-foot iron rod he's holding in the picture here, and he carefully tapped the detonator into the TNT as he had done many times before. Unfortunately, this day there was a tragic accident and the detonator went off, blowing that 5-foot iron rod he's holding there through his eye, which is closed because it's gone, through his eye and out the back of his head. 5-foot iron rod, and it ain't skinny. You can see him holding it there. Through his eye and out the back of his head. Miraculous. He lived. Now, this made national headlines, as you can imagine. This was a major event. And you can actually go online and find those headlines. It was really quite an event. And he was talked about. He even did a little tour. But Phineas recovered. And it wasn't because they picked him up with Bayflight, took him to the nearest hospital, did a lot of surgery. He recovered the old-fashioned way. They probably poured whiskey on his face. And Phineas went back to work. When he went back to work, he was different. He had changed. And he had not changed just because he had some sort of post-traumatic stress, although I'm sure he had some. Phineas changed because he was no longer able to make decisions. Now, hear me. He was able to think rationally. They could say, okay, Phineas, these are the plans that you need to follow, and he could follow them. He also was able to be emotional. He still had all his emotions. They were a little bit wilder than they were before. But if they said, Phineas, do we go left or do we go right? They asked him to make a conclusive decision, like, what are you going to wear today? He could not do it. He could certainly get dressed. He knew where his shirt went on top and his pants went on bottom, but he could not make a decision, a rational decision. Why does this matter? Well, many, many years later, there was a group of neuroscientists, brain scientists, brain doctors that were working with a group of cancer patients that had the same problem. They could not make decisions. And what they found was, in their research, they found the story of Phineas Gage. They actually were able to reconstruct his skull, and they discovered that where his brain was severed was the same location that these cancer patients had tumor growths that were severing their brain link. And there is an important link here. Our brains are linked from the emotional to the rational part of the brain, meaning you've got more of your emotional part of your brain in the back here, and you've got more of your rational part of your brain in the front here. I'm going to keep this as unscientific as I can, but I got to give you a little bit of anatomy for you to understand this. Most of you have probably already heard of this. So the important thing to realize is that the stimuluses that come into our brain, everything that we encounter every day, whether it's a car speeding at you or it is you just watching this webinar, all of that stimulus is coming first through your emotional brain and then going into your rational brain. And they're linked, meaning we can't separate the emotion from the rational. It's actually interesting how they're linked, though, and that's what I want you to really take away from this. They're linked in this way. The emotion can actually cut off or shorten the rational influence on our thoughts. And this is a good thing. Imagine you are stepping off of a curb and you look up and you see a bus heading right towards you. This is not the time to go back to 9th grade algebra class and start going, all right, a bus is heading north-northwest at 60 miles an hour and the wind is coming south-southwest. Boom, you're flat as a pancake. You're dead. Your brain is not going to allow that to happen. You were created with some wiring intact to short circuit that from happening. And what happens is all of a sudden the emotional brain sees the stimulus comes into the emotional brain, it fires off hormones like adrenaline, and you get put back up on that curb so fast you didn't even have a chance to think about it. Sometimes people describe car accidents as being like a blackout experience. They don't even have memory of what happened. Their brains so shut it off to just react physically. Again, this is a good thing. The problem is that your brain, without that rational influence, does not always understand what is a threat and what isn't a threat. So it gets programmed over time as to what threats are and what threats aren't. For example, you may be driving to work in the morning and be really, really stressed because you've been late a lot lately. Of course, this isn't happening to any of us right now. But remember back when we used to drive to work and you would be late, you would be in traffic, and you would be frustrated, and you have all these hormones coming in. We're programming our brain that being late is a massive threat. Then next thing you know, some jerk cuts you off in traffic, and you just explode. You lose it. What happened? Well, your brain just saw it as a threat, and you did something dumb you otherwise would not have done. You didn't think. Why? Emotional brain short-circuited right to your hormones. The next thing you know, cortisol, adrenaline is surging through your system. As Travis Bradberry, the author of Emotional Intelligence 2.0, has famously said, we have an emotional reaction to events always before we have a rational reaction to events. Okay, so why do I give us all this? Well, what we need to do in emotional intelligence is very, very simple. The science of emotional intelligence is not the science of eliminating emotions, as most people think it is. Guys, listen, emotions are not your problem. Emotions are a strength. Emotions are not your problem. What we do in emotional intelligence, the science here, is one of having a good filter. What it basically boils down to is this: doing the right thing in spite of your emotions. Emotional intelligence is not about eliminating emotions so that we can always do the right thing. Emotional intelligence is about understanding that the emotion is there, recognizing it, knowing why it's there, what its strengths are and what its hindrances are, and then doing the right thing anyway. What this means is not that you're cool as a cucumber all the time. It means you're passionate. It means you can even be rightfully angry at times. It means you can be sad at the right moments, but it's not so much just about it having the right emotions to fit the right situation, as much as it is saying this: no matter what emotion I'm feeling, I'm able to be rational. That's the challenge, because if we're being honest, what we try to do is fix our feelings first so that we're rational, and that leaves us failing over and over and over again. Instead, what we need to do, and what great leaders, what great salespeople, what great coaches, what great athletes, what great entrepreneurs do, is they say, I know those emotions are there, but I'm going to do this anyway. I'm going to do the right thing anyway. I'm going to hear my emotions, but they will not control me. That does not mean that they are eliminated. And that is what emotional intelligence is. So that means even when you're scared, you can pick up the phone and make calls. What that means is even when you don't feel like it, you can go to the gym. What that means is even when you don't want to, you can stand up on a stage and speak to many people. You're still going to be scared. You're still going to be angry. You're still going to have those things, but you can make the right decisions. So if you really think about it, emotional intelligence is kind of just another fancy way of saying maturity. We're just getting all grown up. So that's what it is. But we're taking a look at this from a scientific or a biological point of view. What emotional intelligence isn't, is it isn't a substitute for anything spiritual or anything like that. So I want to be very clear about this. What we're trying to avoid here is what I've already described as the emotional hijacking. We don't want our emotions to shortcut us or short circuit us to where we do really stupid stuff, okay? So here's the book definition. I did not come up with this definition. This is the book definition of emotional intelligence. It's our ability to recognize and understand our emotions in ourselves and also others. And then our ability to use this awareness to manage behavior and relationships. So emotional intelligence is a skill. It's a skill that is housed in the mind. It is biologically connected. We are using the biological processes of our brains, understanding them from a psychological point of view so that we control our mind doesn't control us, and our emotions, though present, don't keep us from being irrational, or keep us from being rational or being irrational. So that's it. That should be plenty of an introduction. But let me just say this, what it isn't. Emotional intelligence is not spiritual, okay? Sometimes people will bring spiritual aspects into this. No, this is a scientific thing. So the spiritual, of course, affects emotional intelligence. It has influence on it, of course. But I'm not here to talk about how you can have perfect inner peace. Emotional intelligence is not, though it can help you certainly emotionally, it is not a gateway to inner peace. It's not going to tell you what you should be doing with your life. It's not designed to do that. It's not going to tell you what to think. It's not like that either. It's not therapy. That said, like all other sciences, it can be connected to other sciences and help us better leverage them. Like I said before, emotional intelligence isn't sales training. But if you're emotionally intelligent, any sales training you get is going to be a lot better because you're going to be able to be in the game. Emotional intelligence isn't basketball. But if you're emotionally intelligent and you're pressured at that final game, at the final jump shot at the buzzer, you're going to be a lot better. You have a lot better chance of making that shot because you have these skills. So though it is not these other skills, it links to pretty much all sciences. And there's 5 components to emotional intelligence. Now, these were categorized by a man named Daniel Goleman, who really popularized emotional intelligence with his book, Emotional Intelligence, that came out a couple decades ago now, though he did not invent emotional intelligence in any way. So the 5 components are self-awareness, self-regulation, and motivation. Those really have to do with us. Motivation is us and others. And then social skills and empathy, which really have to deal with others. So emotional intelligence is an us and others science. It's getting ourselves right and also being able to understand others and better lead. So it's connected to social skills tremendously. It's connected to leadership tremendously. It's connected to selling, to coaching, to counseling tremendously, because it has to do with our emotional state and that of others. All right, that has been a long introduction. We are a good almost 25 minutes in already. So I want to pause here and give you a chance to kind of collect your thoughts of what we've been talking about. So I've got a couple of questions. You can answer any one of them in the chat. My first question is, have you ever heard emotional intelligence explained to you like that? Or have you always thought it was an absence of emotions? That would be one question you might answer in the chat. Another question you might answer in the chat is, where would you like to apply this right now? In your own personal life, not just in the world at large. But in your own personal life, where could you see a mastering of emotional intelligence benefiting that way? Janice says she's never seen it summed up as maturity. You know, Janice, there's a reason for that, because if I had a training that said maturity training, no one would come to it. Even emotional intelligence is hard to get people to sign up for. It's hard to have the humility to admit that this is an area that could help us. But when we begin to see its applications, you want to be a student of it forever. Beverly wants me to apply it to the crazy COVID stuff, and we will. Where else do you see this applying in your life? Olivia says so we thought it was about controlling emotions. I want to be careful here, because that is a result, but here's how the result happens. As we filter better and become more rational, we re-educate our emotional brain, and we end up, as a byproduct, becoming more controlled in our emotions, if you will. Child rearing, marriage, able to process differences, all of those things. It is a science that applies everywhere. And the truth is that you can't take a 2-hour class and just be a different person. But I really believe that you're going to walk away with some tremendous tools and ability to get better even today. I'm going to give you stuff you can be doing on a daily basis. All right, now normally when I do this training, it is not in a webinar format, so we have lots of interaction. So I want you guys to feel free to get into the chat. We are going to take at least one decent break during this to make sure you can get refreshed, because this is a lot of information. All right, before I go into what we're going to do next is we're going to break down each of these 5 areas. Kind of unpack them and give you some practical things you can do. We're going to kind of go less from let's talk about the science of emotional intelligence and get more into some practical stuff you can really do. Before I do so, I just want to say this one main thing here about emotional intelligence I think is really so important. Historically, emotional intelligence is actually not new. So when public schools began coming together, all the wise think tanks in Washington and around the world even were saying, what do we need to train the next generation on to be able to say, a more competitive country. So we were looking at different things that we would need, and we also wanted to come up with different ways to assess that. So they came up with IQ, and we're all familiar with IQ, intelligence quotient, which is a way to measure our intellect. And that, of course, is important. They also came up with EQ. This is not new. Emotional quotient, or a way to understand emotional intelligence. And what the leaders at the time said, it's over 100 years ago, was, what, all those things are important. Both those things are equally important. But we were sitting at a place in history where we needed more engineers. We needed better military defenses. We needed bridges. We needed infrastructure. We needed electricity. We needed nuclear power, or so we thought. But we needed all those things. And so what we trained our next generation on was reading and writing and arithmetic. That was the focus in our schools. And we didn't focus so much on emotional intelligence. But we didn't need to. It was being done at home. It was being done in communities. It was being done in churches. It was being done in the family unit. If you think about it, if you've had the benefit of knowing your great-grandparents, your memories of them are probably of pretty strong folks, mentally tough. They've been through a lot. They just had a wisdom about them with life and how to handle life. Well, that was passed down generation to generation, but as we kind of focused more and more on the IQ, and it was being less passed down in school and in the family units, this has sort of gone away. So if you think about your grandparents, they're probably pretty emotionally intelligent people. Now think about your parents. Were they emotionally intelligent? Now think about yourself in comparison to those grandparents or great-grandparents. What about your kids? What about kids these days? Well, if we're being honest, and I know this is heavy, but children these days are have IQs and they've been educated like never before. They're all little engineers. I mean, by 8th grade, they can design computers. Problem is they can also design bombs. The bigger problem is because they don't have emotional intelligence, they use them on each other. So what we have today is not a failing to train IQ. It's not just that we need more education. We actually need more maturity. We need to be able to handle the stresses. Now, a lot of arguments can be made, and this isn't an ethics lesson, but a lot of arguments can be made, well, the influences are different today. Well, they didn't have technology. They didn't have social media. And you know what? I think all of that's probably true. But no matter what, if we're being honest, we don't have emotional intelligence being trained in that family unit as we once did. And so what we're seeing today is, I think, a lot of the consequences of it. And the reason why I say that's the main thing I want you to hear today is because we actually all have a chance to change the world. If we can become emotionally intelligent, and if we can learn how to train others in this, then, while again, it doesn't solve all the problems of crime and all of these things in the universe or issues of the human heart, but what it does do is give us more tools to be able to be more rational, to take all that great training that we have and use it in a better way. Now, again, it doesn't solve all the issues of evil in the world, but what it does do is it takes that, say, that young student and who's so frustrated and so stressed and so anxious, and it teaches them how to deal with all of those things using their rational mind, so they end up doing the right thing and not the wrong thing. And of course, in our businesses, it's tremendous. Why? Because we become better leaders. We can help people. We can then pass this ability on to others, even just by exemplifying it. And through that, the world has changed. And that's why I'm so passionate about doing this training. And that's why we're going to dive in now, and I'm going to stop rambling about it. All right, so our first component, our first pillar of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. So what is self-awareness? Self-aware people, they get it, right? They understand their own strengths. They also understand their own weaknesses. Therefore, they can quickly identify triggers. They can gauge their own feelings, and they do it with rigorous honesty. If emotional intelligence is just a fancy business word for maturity, then self-awareness is a fancy business word for humility. Look, we live in a day and age when we all want to be careful to protect one another's self-esteem. And I don't think there's anything wrong at all with having confidence and understanding what your strengths are. By all means, we need to know that. But we also need to know what we lack. By knowing the gaps, we're able to then fill them. You know, you could scroll your social news feed right now and see a ton of stuff out there that says, you're great, you're amazing, you can do whatever you want, don't let anyone stop you. And while I know that's just encouraging language and I don't want to read into it, it's good that we wake up every day and say, you know I can do great things, I'm confident in the abilities I have. But we also want to wake up every day and say, one area I'm focusing on is, say, being a more active listener. Or one area I'm working on is my patience. We don't want to say, I'm not patient, and just kind of surrender to it. But we want to be able to say, I'm working on my patience, and then actually be doing it. That's self-awareness. So without self-awareness, you don't grow. As a matter of fact, your ability to grow in emotional intelligence is 100% predicated upon your level of self-awareness. It is the most important step, and so it's going to be the step we focus a lot on here today. No pain, no gain. But it doesn't have to be painful. It should be a good thing. So let's start. Let's just work together, kind of go a little workshop style here now. All of you kids playing at home, I want you to play along now, okay? It's time to not multitask and do a bunch of stuff, but tune in here and let's work on this together. Let's grow in self-awareness together right now. That's going to start by you rating your emotional quotient yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. So level 1 is, say, you know, you're just a wild person. You're just a bull in a china shop from the minute you wake up to the minute you go to sleep. And level 10 would be you're just completely in control. And some of you are jumping in and putting it in the chat. I appreciate that. It's very bold of you. But no matter what, I want you to write it down somewhere. I want you to be rigorously honest and write in your chat. Now, the question is not what's your EQ right now. you got to take an average of your good days and your bad days to really understand what it is. So think deep and be honest. What do you think your emotional intelligence is? All right, good job. Most people, when ranking themselves, at least people who would be willing to come to an emotional intelligence training, unless you were sent here, most people would rank their emotional intelligence on a scale of 1 to 8. I'm sorry, from 6 to 8. That's kind of your average score. But if we're being honest, it's kind of hard to rank our own emotional intelligence. Why? Well, because our self-awareness is limited, as I've already pointed out. So how do we do it then? And I saw one of you raised your hand. You can type in the Q&A, and I will try to get to your questions. By all means, I'm happy to be interrupted. Keep this interactive. So if you just go up to the little Q&A part and you put in a question, I will certainly answer it, if I can. So here's the next part of this. Would your closest friend or relative agree with your score? Here's our humility checker. So go back now and look at what you wrote. So maybe you put 7 or 8. And ask yourself, if I went home, or you can just mute, well, you're all muted because of the webinar, you just yell into the next room, honey, what's my emotional intelligence on a scale of 1 to 10? And see if they come back with the same score. They might even give you a higher score. As Demetria said here in the chat, they'd rank you higher. And that's good to hear. Some of you might be thinking, depends on the day. So, you know, for me, even though I do this training on a regular basis, I think it really depends on the audience. You know, most people that I coach, most companies that I work with, I hope would give me a pretty high score. But when I go home with my family at night, you know, they may say, Daddy, oh, he's a bear. You know? Now, hopefully that's not the case. But, you know, sometimes the people we love the most and we let our guard down with the most, or maybe who have worn us out the most, see our worst side. So to grow in emotional intelligence is to grow at our worst times. It's not to give ourselves pats on the back. It's to say, you know what, at work, maybe my EQ is fine. But what about at home? What about driving to work in the morning? So if we're being honest, again, this is all about honesty. It really probably depends, but there's similarities between every situation. So if your EQ is really low at home, but it's really high at work, you have to ask yourself why. What's going on there? And at its root, emotional intelligence is all about asking those deeper questions. Hey, why am I so short with people at home and so patient and empathetic with coworkers? What is it with me that's doing that? And it isn't to go, oh, I'm broken, oh, I'm terrible, and have a defeated outlook. No, it's because you recognize that great leaders are great leaders in every situation. And we really want to work on those things. And if you work on it, you will get better. So the next test here is to identify our primary emotions. Now, look, you're a human being. At least I hope you are. And human beings are emotional. You have every emotion. Every primary emotion is yours. It's in there, whether you express them or not. But we do have primary expressive emotions. Now, to make this really simple, some of us are more prone to fight, and some of us are more prone to flight. So when I train on emotional intelligence, most people always think of that person, the hothead, the fighter, the confronter, the aggressive person. But guys, emotional intelligence is just as much for those who run from a fight, who are scared of their own shadow, who are quick to shut down even emotionally. That's still an emotional hijacking. So my question is, are you more fight or are you more flight? And then of fight or flight, what's your primary expressive emotion? So for example, for me, primary expressive emotions are optimism and frustration. Those are the two. I'm usually either being really happy and optimistic, or I'm expressing some sort of frustration. I like to refer to myself as being an angry optimist. Some people are sad. You know, they're just their primary expressive emotion. People say, well, you're always sad. No, they're not always sad. It's just their primary expressive emotions. So the first start of understanding self-awareness is kind of identifying that. So you can add that in the chat, or you can go ahead and just write it down. You should come up with at least two or three primary expressive emotions, or at least just know if you're more fight or more flight. Take a minute and do that. We'll be getting to our first break here in about 10 minutes. Good, honest folks in the chat. I appreciate that. Of course, unless you're watching on Facebook Live, most people in this are going to be realtors and entrepreneurs. And most of you realtors and entrepreneurs, and I'll make sure to apply this specifically to real estate today, most of you are extroverts. If you were to take the DISC behavior language, for example, most realtors are D's and I's on the DISC scale. What that means, for those of you who don't understand DISC as a behavior language, is most of you are extroverted and most of you are optimistic. So if I was training this in the classroom back at Pro or C-Pro, I'd have a pretty interactive, giggly group that was willing to open up and confess the worst things about themselves. But you make up less than 50% of the population. A lot of people, especially more introverted people, tend to have the primary emotions of fear or sadness. And so one of the first things we need to understand as we grow in self-awareness is that we aren't everybody else. And most of you know that, but it's kind of nice to be able to see ways to kind of codify that, and DISC is a great way to do it. Some people are what are called ambiverts. They're a little bit extroverted and a little bit introverted. So some of them have both fight and flight. All right, now that you have your primary emotions identified, the next part of this exercise in self-awareness is to identify your top triggers. Triggers. You can't talk EQ without talking about triggers. Triggers are things that cause us, let me define it for you. Triggers are things that cause us to react emotionally when we otherwise would have reacted rationally. Let me give you an example from my life. So I don't cause road rage. I mean, I'm not a road rage person. I cause road rage, but I don't experience road rage. Typically when I'm driving, I don't get mad as people cut me off and stuff like that. It's not because I'm some, highly emotionally intelligent person. I just honestly, when I'm driving somewhere, I'm focused on other things. So I don't get upset. Again, people probably are upset with me. So that's not a trigger in my life. I think it's a common trigger. That's why I say that. For me, believe it or not, a trigger is interruptions, a big trigger for me. So when I am at home trying to work, as I so often am doing right now, and my loving children, who I love so much and are so sweet, come running up to me and say, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy," and I'm focused and I have to look down, I tend to express as a hint, and sometimes more than a hint, of irritation if I'm not careful. And sometimes I can just say, "I got to work right now." Right? That would be the emotional hijacking. Now, what happens? Well, about 5-10 minutes later, I kind of calm down and I'm like, oh, what did I just do? And I got to go and say, listen, guys, I'm so sorry. I was focused and I'm so sorry. I did not, here's what I'm trying to show you. I did not mean to act that way. Whenever you use words like I didn't mean to, or I knew better, but I didn't, what you've just said is, I had an emotional hijacking. And so even though I might be irritated at my child's interruptions, I could have said the right thing. And again, I'm going to keep repeating this, but that is the root of emotional intelligence. It's not simply never being irritated. No one is that perfect. But it's even though I was irritated by the interruption, it's still being sweet or careful with what I say and doing what I intend to do. Now, over time, the longer I do that, I reroute, this is a little bit more biology here, or anatomy, I reroute the highways in my brain. And the more often I actually do those right reactions, the more my brain begins to learn, hey, you don't even need to be irritable here. There's no threat. The opposite also is true. The more I respond in irritation, the easier it becomes. So I've answered your question. This is why some of you are bears at home and doves at work. Because it's just how you've trained your brain. And even though you know better, now you have to have emotional intelligence as a bridge The more you start crossing it in the right way, the easier it's going to get to not be affected by all of those things. Extremely powerful. You have got to realize how much power there is in your reactions. It's not just the damage you do in the moment. It is training muscle memory in the head for how you're going to respond next time. And that's why this is so key. So hopefully you've identified a couple of your triggers now. I'm going to go look in the chat and see. Oh yeah, having to repeat yourself. That's a tough one. Interrupted while working. Lazy people, Shelley says. That's good. What it all comes down to is typically we're triggered when our expectations aren't met. And that's our trigger. And we train ourselves to do that. And then what we do after we have that emotional feeling, we don't like how that feels, we kind of calm down and we come back and we go, look, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to react that way. I wasn't being considerate. So self-awareness starts with this. Hear me on this. It's not about going back and justifying every time we lost it, as we tend to do. Hey, I'm sorry I got irritated. I was working on something important. Emotional intelligence, self-awareness starts with this. Sorry I got irritated. I shouldn't get irritated. Next time, I'm going to do this instead. And that is what emotional intelligence is all about as a skill. Think about it in this way. Take emotional intelligence now, and let's recodify it as training for a sport. You go and do a jump shot. Look, you know how to do the right jump shot. You've been trained on how to do the right jump shot. Sorry, I love basketball. So you do jump shot after jump shot. You've been shown it. You've seen it. You've even done it right before. In the game, you get nervous. You mess up the jump shot. What do? You go back to the coach and go, hey. I was nervous. Doesn't count. No, I'm sorry. It counted. Well, what are you going to do? Well, I was nervous. That's why. So, when I'm nervous, I just don't make jump shots. That's not going to work. You're never going to get put back in the game again. Instead, what do? You go, I'm going to keep practicing that until I can do the jump shot no matter how nervous I am. Emotional intelligence starts with a willingness to dive in and start working. Guys, we don't like to do that. We don't like training. It's painful. Getting in the gym hurts, but we want to be the bodybuilder. We've got to get in the gym of EQ and we got to work it out. I'm going to give you some weightlifting exercises so you can do this, but you've got to do it. We've got to stop going back and justifying, explaining, and defending all of our hiccups. Of course, it's human, but we should be getting better. And as we get better, the results are worth it. You can play in the NBA of emotional intelligence. It starts with going, look, I had a trigger. I had a trigger there, and I'm going to write that trigger down. Oops. See, I just got triggered, messing up my slides. All right, here we are, self-awareness. So where do we go from here? Well, we go to self-regulation. Now, some of the tools I'm going to give you in self-regulation, where we're really going to start to get to work here, are really just tools to grow in self-awareness. Because self-regulation is that ability to begin controlling our impulses and actions. Again, not necessarily eliminating them, although over time they may be eliminated, but really doing the right thing, having the right response no matter what emotions are involved. There's going to be a lot of work to do in this, so what I'm going to do is go ahead and put us on a break. So let's go ahead and take a full 5 minutes. So if you are watching live on social media, we're stepping away intentionally here for 4 or 5 minutes. I want you guys to go take a breather now, get some coffee, get some water, take a walk, detach for a minute, use the restroom, and then come back and let's dive into some self-regulation exercises that I think will help you. If you have any Q&A that you'd like to put in, go ahead and do that too, and I'll make sure to get to those as I can. So we'll be back in 5 minutes. All right, we'll get started back here in just 1 minute. Always kind of different doing this in a webinar format. I'd love to get all the stories and interaction. I'm really looking forward to being back in person with you guys again, I hope soon. Either way, just as a side note, and I'll say this again at the end, these are obviously difficult times. That goes without saying, but one second here. Sorry about that. I was at the Facebook Live blasting in the background. So one of the things that we're doing at Stronghold Training is if you're overwhelmed right now with anxiety, if you're overwhelmed with worry, if you just can't seem to think through your business right now and the things you're trying to apply in your business, normally we have paid services that help with those things, but I'm willing to have a 15-minute call with you. Again, I don't know that I'll be able to solve all your issues in 15 minutes, but if you have anything, go to strongholdtraining.com. You can book a 15-minute call with me there. If you're just overwhelmed, I'd be happy to help if I can. Sometimes even just a 15-minute call can just help change perspective. And again, I'm not a therapist. It's not therapy. But from a business coaching point of view, sometimes when you're just stressed and you're overwhelmed with things and you're not really sure what to do in your business, sometimes even just 15 minutes of talking to someone like a coach like myself can help kind of arrange the perspective of your business. And if I can help, I'm happy to do so free of charge, to have at least a brief call. So you can schedule that with me there, and I will try to do those as I'm able to. All right, and I'll mention that again at the end because I have a little bit more I wanted to say about that, but I want to dive back in. So hopefully you're back from the break. We are talking emotional intelligence. We are talking self-regulation, which you can only regulate your emotions if you're aware of them. And I think we've already covered pretty clearly that being aware of them is more than just understanding you're angry in the moment. It's actually understanding a little bit more as to why you're angry in the moment. Why you're struggling. So we talked about self-awareness goes deeper than just I'm mad, right, or I'm scared. It actually gets into understanding the triggers and understanding how you typically respond in these things. And there's a lot we could talk about how deep self-awareness goes. But the short of it is this. The more you intimately understand what's going on inside your brain with your hormones and biologically based on the impulses you're experiencing, the easier you're able to get in there and disrupt their influence a little bit. Maybe not eliminate them, but disrupt their influence. And over time, as you respond differently, you're going to rewire and basically eliminate a lot of those triggers. So there's a lot of great testimonies as to how that has happened. All right, so let's just start getting into making you a little bit more self-regulated, and myself as well. I learn every time I do this. So let's grow in self-regulation together. So that starts by identifying something physical we can do when we become aware of an emotional trigger or response. Now, I got to be honest with you guys. If this is your first emotional intelligence training, you're probably not realizing this. So this is like your third or fourth. Then you're going to see I approach emotional intelligence a little bit different than some other people. It's the same basic principles. I mean, I'm not reinventing emotional intelligence, but I have found that sometimes emotional intelligence can fail us, because it's so focused on the science that it's kind of hard to implement. Let me give you an example. So I can understand how my brain works and all this chemistry and all that's wonderful, but in the moment, I'm not usually able to do something about it. In the moment, I need a lot more immediate help. So I look to Pavlov for this. So Pavlov is a famous behavioral psychologist who came up with the Pavlov's dogs experiment that most of you learned about in Psychology 101 back in high school. So if you remember, Pavlov had these dogs, and he would feed them, which is good. And every time he fed them, he rang a bell. So they began associating feeding time. They associated that with a bell. And what Pavlov found is that he could ring that bell at any time of the day, and the dogs would salivate. They recognized a bell was they were about to eat, and so they salivated. You know, that's no big deal. That makes completely common sense. I've witnessed that in my own life. But I want you to understand, the dogs didn't think about it. They didn't go and check and make sure dinner was there and then salivated. They heard the bell and immediately had a physical response to it. The bell became a trigger. Well, so triggers, even though we think of those as bad things, they can actually be good things, and we can rewire our triggers. And one of the easiest ways to do this in the short term is to begin ringing a bell. But we're not going to ring a literal bell. That would be a little annoying. So I'm going to give you an example of one. So I told you earlier that I get sometimes irritated by interruptions. And what I tend to do when I'm interrupted, or at least what I used to tend to do, I'm using an example that's not going to embarrass me. I used to get where I would fire off right away in a very intense way. So I'm training in a class and someone goes, that's not true. And someone would respond to me and I'd immediately engage them. My face would get red. I'd feel the flushing and I'd begin arguing. That's old Thom. And what I started doing because of emotional intelligence training is whenever I get interrupted and immediately feel that irritation, I started taking a drink. Just a little water. And it's amazing. Within a couple of weeks of doing that, I was interrupted a lot. It was in sales training. Within a week, or just a few weeks, I started noticing that when I get interrupted, I would get thirsty. I would get a dry throat. It was impossible for me to get interrupted now and not thirst. And when that thirst came, it was coming with the other trigger. So now I have two triggers. I have the trigger of the interruption causing the irritation and boom, also causing thirst. And so I would begin drinking. And what can't I do when I'm drinking? I can't respond. But more importantly, when I'm taking that drink, it triggered a memory of you do this because sometimes you respond too quickly. So I wouldn't then respond too quickly. And over time, over a course of months, I started learning that that trigger, or what got remapped in my brain, the pathways got remapped, is that triggered response changed. So now literally I get interrupted and I get excited. I don't get irritated, but oddly, I still get thirsty. So the famous one, and I see someone already put that in the chat, the famous one that we've all heard is take a deep breath. That's good, but you have to associate the deep breath with something. So if you're a person that's like, don't like confrontation, you feel yourself getting upset, and you take a deep breath, what we tend to think is that deep breath calms me down. And it does. I mean, scientifically, there's just a lot happening in the body that does cause us to calm down. But I want you to begin taking that deep breath and also saying to yourself, respond appropriately, or be a leader. Have like a word. So it's like, be a leader, be a leader, be a leader. So the deep breath becomes natural, be a leader becomes natural, and then you're going to remember, it's not about the emotion. I can still be angry and now be a leader. Do you see that? The more often you do that, next thing you know, the irritation will actually go away. The response will become natural. Our brain is reflexive, okay? So you need to identify something physical you can do that's associated now to those emotional triggers. So look back at your triggers that you already wrote on your prior sheet. This is why I'm having you take notes. Hopefully you're keeping up. Look at those triggers. Some of you can't walk away, take a walk, go read a book with some of those triggers. And if you're driving, you can't do much. So what is something physical you can do? And you can feel free to borrow some of the ones we've had here. But I want you to take a trigger, one of the triggers you have there, maybe circle it or draw a line to it, and write what you're going to do now going forward. And I'm going to really ask you to consider trying this. It's amazing how fast we can rewire our brain. Yep, Carolyn says it's reprogramming the brain. It literally is. It's nothing different than what we do when we practice. Like when you practice jump rope, I'm in this new workout program and it's got me jumping rope. When I was a kid, I could jump rope with the best of them. Not so much anymore. I'm having to rewire my brain. I can't do a whole lot of thinking when I'm doing a jump rope. I can't be watching the rope in my feet. I just start to get a rhythm until it becomes natural. Guys, it happens pretty quick. And it can with our emotional lives too. If you want to walk away from this webinar not snapping at your spouse as fast, I'm giving you the solution right now. It's literally to take a drink of water or something like that and associate it with a word or a thought. So think of one now. We'll all at least get more hydrated. Nice little mind hack. Most people, unfortunately, won't do it, but man, does it work. And we're going to get into this more in motivation, if I can speed us up here. So let's start speeding up a little bit now. Now, emotional intelligence is going to tell you to use what's called the STAR technique. And I don't, squeeze ball, Joni said, that's excellent, actually. So anything that has muscle associated with it is really, really helpful. So the STAR technique is what emotional intelligence typically goes to. So any EQ book you read is going to talk about STAR. And what STAR is, just a simple acronym. It stands for stop, think, assess, respond, review. Stop, think, assess, respond, review. And that's nice. That's a nice little pattern of what happens. But let's be honest, that doesn't happen usually in the moment. You know, you're sitting there trying to do something, and or you're driving and someone cuts you off in traffic. You go, let me stop, think, assess, respond, review. I wish, right? So that's why I have the physical thing being there. But ultimately, that's what we're trying to program our brain to do, is to not react, but respond, to think and respond, think and respond. And sometimes we have to trick our brain a little bit more. So here's what I'm saying. Hopefully you pick up on this. Old impulse or old trigger caused action A, irritation, fight or flight. Response A doesn't change, or impulse A does not change. The impulse is still the same. The trigger is still the same. The feeling is still the same. But now what we're going to train our brain to is when I feel that emotion, I react differently. Well, that's common sense. That's what I've been trying to do all along. But you can actually train your brain to do this. And the way you train your brain, hear me on this, the primary way you train your brain is to first train a pause. We tend to think of how do I respond? And what we're actually doing is we're actually just trying to give ourselves a different reaction, but we actually don't want to react at all. We actually want to respond. To respond requires a pause. I do a lot of interview training with people. I teach people how to interview and how to be interviewed. And I tell them after every question, take a breath. Even the ones that you were like softball pitches and you were ready to hit it over the wall, you still take a breath. Why? Because it's going to keep you in a response mode. It's going to keep you rational, because even the great question that you respond to quickly and react to, sometimes we don't come across saying it exactly how we wanted to. You know this because you're driving home after the interview. You're like, why did I say that? That's why you didn't take the pause. The pause is key to allowing that emotional brain to hit the switch to rational brain. Emotion's still there. Rational takes the lead. It's called the long route versus the short route. Okay, something physical helps with that. Next, in regulation. Our next step in self-regulation is actually to go back to self-awareness. We begin regulating ourselves by getting ahead of this stuff, by actually doing something every day to self-regulate. Here's the big thing. If all of you are looking for something, hey, what can I walk away with today and be different? Here it is. Here's the gold nugget you can walk away with and be different today. Start taking yourself seriously. You know, if you spent the better part of your life reacting to something negatively, or you just find yourself being primarily fight or flight in certain situations, start taking that seriously. Commit to saying that does not have to be the norm for me anymore. Start making that more painful than it is. You've learned to endure those things. It's time to stop settling for that. It's to start saying, no, I can be better. And so we actually want to increase the pain. So we start self-regulating by starting to not accept certain behaviors from ourselves. And at the end of every day, you could take an inventory. 12-step groups use this. It's actually have you ever heard of the 12 steps of whatever 12-step group? It's step number 10. They take an honest daily inventory. That means at the end of the day, you do this in a journal. It's best to write this. And you actually write down what you did right and what you did wrong. You want to reinforce the right behaviors. You want to feel again be reminded of the bad behaviors. And as much as that sounds like it's going to hurt, well, it's going to help, because you're going to start looking back and saying, I responded this way, that's not okay. And instead of just being past it and over it, we don't actually want to get over it. We want to get at it. And we're going to do that by reminding ourselves, now that we're not in the moment anymore, now that we're not emotional anymore, we're coming back and we're reassessing, reinventorying what happened. And we're going to say, tomorrow, if this happens, I'm going to do this different. We're going to start reprogramming our brain. What we tend to do is just try to get past it. All right. That's the honest daily inventory. Of course, a coach is helpful with that. This isn't the pitch for you to hire me, but a coach is really good at that. And there's a couple other tools I want to just kind of quickly give you. So kind of along that inventory thing, a technique that I really like is called the character inventory. So get a list of character traits or core values or behaviors. You can Google it, Google list of character traits. I'm talking about things like being available, being patient, being gentle. You can just get a list of them. Core values, being efficient. You can even go look at performance review things that companies use. Just kind of get a list of behaviors and character traits that are important to you. And then you're going to rank yourself on either immature, maturing or growing, or mature or mastered, okay? Even though we never really master anything, you get the idea here. And you're going to sit down and rank yourself. Am I either immature, maturing, or mature? You're going to rank yourself. Then you're going to go to a best friend, a coach, a mentor, or if you're brave, a significant other, and you're going to give them the same list. You're not going to show them your score, and you're going to ask them to rank you. And you're going to ask them to take some time with this and really consider it. And you need to tell them that you're not going to argue with them, that you're trying to get better. Now, it's going to take them a little while. They're going to come back, and they're going to sit down and share with you their score. Your job during this exercise is not to defend, justify, or explain anything. You are only allowed to ask questions. And I mean real questions, not, yeah, but are you sure? Not those types of questions. I mean, like, help me to understand that better. Give me a clear picture. What we're looking for here is two things. Number one, we're looking for blind spots, meaning a place where you thought you were mature and they thought you were immature. That would be a blind spot. And the second thing we're looking for here is perspective. So I'll give you an example. The first time I did this with my wife and my best friend at the time, we sat down. They ranked me. My friend, he ranked me great on some things, pretty much had the same thing. My wife had a few areas that I did not. She had me as immature in a couple areas that I had myself as mature or maturing. And one of them that really stood out to me was availability, being available. Now, my friend said I was available. He gave me mature on that. My wife had immature. And I thought, why would she say I'm immature? I'm home every day by 5:30. I don't work weekends. I make sure to take vacations. I give so much time and set aside so much time. Had I not done that, had I been like most entrepreneurs and worked, 15-hour days all the time, I'd probably be a lot further, but I love her so much, I gave her so much time. That's how, at the time, I was viewing it. It's a long time ago. Don't be mad at me. So in this exercise, I can't say that. So instead I said, tell me what you mean. She goes, well, I know that you're home every day and that you block off your schedule, but sometimes when you're here, you're not here. When you're here, your mind is distracted. I can tell your mind is still on other things. She goes, to be honest with you, I don't even need you here as much if you're just present when you're here. And my question was, give me specific examples. And she began giving me very specific examples. Now, while I was somewhat aware of those things, I really felt them now. I couldn't dodge them anymore. I couldn't justify them. Hear me on this. My self-awareness by this exercise was massively increased. And simply because of that, because of the self-regulation exercise, when I came home at night the very next day, I couldn't do the same things I did before. I was constrained by this exercise. Now, do I live perfectly in that every day? Of course not. But you can see how a regular assessment by other people, which requires a lot of humility, can be very helpful. One of the keys to self-regulation is stopping the justifying route and starting to ask honest feedback and perspective from others. Now, you need to be your own person to some degree, of course. You got to take what other people say with a grain of salt. It is their perspective after all. It does not necessarily mean it is 100% truth. But if we really want to have better relationships, then we need to grow in understanding others' perspectives. All right, there's a lot we could do between self-awareness and self-regulation, but I do want to get through the other slides. So what I'm going to ask you at this point in time is if you have a character trait you want to work on, you can write that down or type that in the chat. Or if you have any questions on self-awareness or self-regulation before we move into the trickier stuff of motivation, social skills, and empathy, go ahead and type it now. So I'll give you a minute to type any questions you have or share anything you want in the chat. The honesty is refreshing for those of you who are putting remarks in the chat. I really appreciate it. And that is where self-awareness and self-regulation begins. Sarcasm is a great example of that. And these are excellent responses in the chat. I know those of you who are watching live on social media can't see this. Oh, Jenny's saying she can't see everyone else's responses. So if you look down at the bottom, because it's a webinar, if you look down at the bottom, my apologies, should have said this at the beginning, it says the little to button there in the chat, it'll say to all. Most of you are probably typing in to all panelists. I'm a panelist. You want it to say to all panelists and attendees. If you have that option. Hopefully you do. So most of you are putting to all panelists. So I'm seeing your responses, but others aren't. My apologies. So yeah, you can put to all panelists and attendees. And some of you are only sending that to me. That's good. And then I'm just reading them out loud. All right, perfect. So keep typing away. I think this is helpful. Like I said, I do this typically over 6 hours or 3 2-hour sessions as a workshop. I've also done this training over the course of 6 days. I find that to be really helpful when you can take a break of a couple days in between or a week in between. And then I have one all-day workshop where I do this over the course of a whole day. It really helps to get to work on this. It's really easy to walk away from this and not be any different. Again, emotional intelligence has to do with so many different aspects of our lives, and I'm going to apply this specifically to real estate here in just a minute as we get into our next section, which is motivation. So motivation, when we think of it typically as emotional. If you were to ask anyone on the street to define motivation, they mean like, you really feel like doing something. What do we say? I got to get motivated to go to the gym. I got to get motivated to pick up my phone and make dials to FSBOs and expireds. I got to get motivated to do something. And again, what we're typically saying is I need to make myself get supercharged and feel like doing it. And on one hand, that's true. That is motivated. You do want to do it. But I want you to think of motivation a little bit more in the terms of discipline, or a little bit more in the terms of the will. Have you ever willed to do something but didn't feel like it? Of course you have. If you didn't, then you would probably look like everyone on the front of the bodybuilder magazine. We oftentimes will to do things, and it's not an issue of strategy. It's a problem of our emotions. So what do? We go, well, I need to get myself really, really motivated, worked up and excited, and I want to do it. But that emotion is fleeting. So in emotional intelligence, highly motivated people are willing to defer immediate results or willing to ignore immediate pain so that they can have long-term success. They're disciplined. in a sense. Normally what we think of as discipline, but it's actually motivation. You have to understand true motivation involves the emotions, habits, and the will. All of those things. And in the context of emotional intelligence, it comes to play that, just like it did in the other sections I was talking about, even though a negative emotion is present, we'll still do the rational thing. So you see, you can begin taking our understanding of emotional intelligence and apply it to motivation. Now, normally I prefer that we've really mastered those two things more than we probably think we have to be able to apply it here, but you'll probably understand self-awareness and self-regulation more as we go through this. So let's just kind of dive into our motivation exercise. If you're like me, this is the area I get most excited. So I want to overcome all my emotional deficiencies and do everything I want to do. Selfishly, this is my favorite section. So we start by identifying the habits we're challenged to form, and we identify the emotions associated with them. Really simple. So for example, you want to diet, but you feel like eating at night. So it's a really easy one to use because most of us can identify with it. So I'm sitting there at night and I really want to have abs, but I really am stressed out and want ice cream, so it's going to make me feel better. Okay, well, which is the emotion I should listen to? It's not about the emotion. The emotion's going to be there. What we need to do is make a decision. What is it we actually want to do? Now, what we typically do is we start fighting against the emotion. Hear me on this. We start thinking, I need to get rid of this emotion. But that isn't emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is going, okay, emotion, you're there. I got you. I know you're there. I know you want to do that. I know why you want to do that. I know all the triggers associated with that. I'm massively self-aware, but I'm rational. And I understand that the rational brain is what I'm going to listen to. Well, how do I do that, Tom? These emotions are so powerful. Well, that's where we go back to beginning to apply self-awareness and self-regulation so we can be motivated. Meaning, you actually need to first and foremost ask a lot more questions of that emotion than we used to. Before you do anything, you're going to just pause. Anyone can pause for 5 seconds. Anyone can pause for 1 second to get another 4. So you pause and you begin thinking. Even though it seems like you're asking yourself questions you already know the answer to, hear me on this, you're actually activating the rational brain. Have you ever noticed you were starving or really wanting a drink or really wanting a piece of sweets, and then you got busy doing something and you forgot how much that impulse was there? Why? You activated the rational brain. It puts your emotional brain on pause. So even though you're laying there on the couch and you have this feeling a million times before that you want to eat and it's really powerful, all you actually have to do is go, all right, let me ask myself a question. What's going on here? What am I feeling? You already know the answer, but you're going to do this anyway. I'm feeling hunger. Okay, I'm feeling hunger. Why am I feeling hunger? Oh, because I'm stressed out and I just want to do it and it feels good. All right, I'm stressed. I want to do it. It feels good. How will I feel tomorrow? How will I feel next week? Now, you already know the answer to this, but if you don't spend the time thinking through it, you're never going to activate the rational brain, which gives all the power to the emotional brain, which, by the way, if the rational brain doesn't engage, the emotional brain begins activating hormones like cortisol. It begins making demands of the body. And so we have got to get the rational brain engaged here. And the rational brain has to start sending responses back saying, I'm going to be okay. And you go, but Tom, I already know that. You know it, but if you really knew it, your emotional brain wouldn't be saying it. You might know it in your rational brain, but they're not communicating. Do you see that? Why is this so powerful? So what's something you can immediately do in the moment? Going back to the Pavlov analogy. The first thing you can do is change your environment. Literally get off the couch and walk into the front room. Get off the couch and walk into the bathroom. Literally go step outside. Take a deep breath and have a conversation with yourself. It's okay to talk to yourself here and think through it. For being honest, that's hard to do in a 3-second window when the impulse comes in. So what you need to do is take a deep breath, take a sip of water, and again, hear me, have a silly conversation with yourself where you're going to ask yourself questions you already know. Even though it sounds like it isn't necessary, if you're a person who's overrun by that impulse in the moment, I'm telling you, biologically it is. And as you do this over and over again, what's going to end up happening is that impulse that was so strong before is going to get less and less and less and less because the reward is going to be different. And you'll start actually having a new trigger. When I'm stressed, I go for a walk outside. When I'm stressed, I take a deep breath and get thirsty. When I'm stressed, I get out of the room. And your brain will remember it. And the impulse will not be to eat. The impulse will be to move. You'll start finding yourself antsy. You just can't lay on the couch at night anymore. Very, very powerful. And guys, if you could just take this to heart and stop thinking you know better, it makes all the difference in the world, myself included. I stumble in the same spot. I have to come back to this training all the time and go, why am I doing that? Why am I doing that? You see, 100 years ago and before, we used to be people that would meditate. And I don't mean sitting on a yoga mat and doing some sort of transcendental meditation. I mean, we used to be a type of people that would sit and think about our thinking. We would consider. We were wiser. We might not have had technology and all the IQ we have today, although I think we had the IQ. But my point is, we might not have had all the knowledge, but we had EQ. We knew that we had to master our own carnal self. We had to master these things. And they did it through a process called meditation. What is meditation? Asking yourself questions and spending time chewing on the answer instead of the ice cream. And that's how you develop a strategy for overcoming habits. What we tend to do is we look for a quick fix. We actually usually just get more emotional. We do what's called replacement therapy. We go, well, I don't feel like eating ice cream. I don't want to eat ice cream anymore, so I'll get carrots instead. Well, that's great, as long as you're able to do that. I'm going to be honest with you. In the moment, I'm probably not going to reach for the carrots, even though I have them there. Some people say, well, you just can't have them in the house. Well, that's true. Not having any ice cream in the house is a form of true accountability, as I call it, which we'll get into here in a second. But true accountability or accountability helps. It really does work, guys. There's nothing wrong with getting rid of the ice cream altogether. But if we're thinking emotionally intelligent here, we realize that didn't change the impulse. Over time, it does, because I go for the ice cream and I can't get it. But my wife will tell you there's been many a night at 8 o'clock at night when I've driven to Publix to buy ice cream. So when the impulse is strong enough, it's better to master it. Now, sometimes kind of cutting off the opportunity does dull the impulse, and that's good, but we also need to work on this meditation to get where we need to get. And I promise we're going to apply this tremendously here to real estate. This is the first place we're going to apply it to real estate. We need to fight overachiever tendencies. An overachiever is not someone who achieves more than other people. An overachiever is someone who goes for perfection, and when they don't hit it, they throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let me give you an example. I'm going to work out Monday, Wednesday, and Friday this week. I'm done with being fat. I'm going to work out Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. It's on my calendar. I'm all ready. I've got everything locked and loaded. Monday comes along. I don't work out. I didn't meet the mark. You know what overachievers do? They don't work out Wednesday and Friday then. They start again the next Monday. So what we want to do is actually fight that. So instead, you go, I want to work out 3 times a week. So I'm going to put it on my calendar Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Monday, you don't work out, no big deal. You feel a lot more pressure to do it, but you're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Tuesday comes along, you don't work out, and now you really feel like you need to do it. So instead of giving up, you still have 3 chances to get 3 in. So next thing you know, you work out Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. That's how it works. So how does this work in real estate? The 3 biggest things I hear from my real estate clients that they struggle with, they always say it: time management, making calls, follow up, and follow through. Okay? Those are the 3 things. And the fact of the matter is, they come to me, and what do they ask for? Thom, give me some really clever lead generation. Thom, hold me accountable so I don't make these mistakes anymore. Get rid of the ice cream, right? Or give me some sort of easier way to say this so that I'll feel like doing it. Nothing wrong with asking for those 3 things, and I certainly am able to help in those areas. But really what we have to begin working on is this stuff right here. If you think about this, how different would your business be if you had made 25 calls a day for the past 5 years? How much more bond would you have with your customers? How many more referrals would you have? What would your business look like today? I mean, let's face it. What if you had worked out for 30 minutes a day for the past 20 years? What would you feel like today? Consistency. is often what we need. And that is usually, we're thrown off the beam of consistency because of emotional intelligence issues, more than issues of strategy. Most of you have already heard what to do. The problem is in the implementation, and it's because we're emotional creatures. So when it comes to being a better realtor, hear me on this. To be an emotionally intelligent realtor means the next time you plan to make 20 calls, which hopefully is tomorrow, and you don't make 20 calls, instead of going, oh, I suck, you're going to say, why didn't I make calls? Back to self-awareness. I didn't make calls because I didn't feel like them. Okay, well, what did you feel like? Well, I felt reluctance. I felt scared. I felt like I didn't know what to say. I felt like I didn't want to be rejected. All right, guess what, guys? You're going to feel like that the next day too, and the next day too, and the next day too. And it would be easy to say, just do it anyway, but that's not going to make you do it anyway. Instead, I want you to say, okay, those are my triggers and these are my emotions. Making the call is my trigger. These are my emotions. Therefore, a rational brain, I know anytime I go to make calls, I'm going to feel this. Now, the feeling is expected. We're bracing for it, okay? And we're going to plan that when that comes, this is what we're going to do. And we're going to fight overachiever tendencies. And you know what you're going to do? You're not going to plan to make 20 calls. This may surprise you, but you're going to make one call. You go, oh, Thom, I get it. You know, you're just saying just do one call. Like, that's just a brain hack. Even though your brain says, I know what you're up to, doesn't make it any less powerful. You do not need to do 20 calls. You need to fight that pride. You need to put that pride to bed. I just want you to make one call. Just have one conversation. Just one. Just one. So that you can rewire that brain that's telling you what the expected pain is. So then you make the call. 90% chance or greater, it's not going to give you the things that your emotions were telling you. Warning, danger, warning, danger. Not going to happen. You're going to make a call, you're going to have a nice conversation. You're going to get off the phone. And you're going to say out loud to yourself, all right, I felt like this. I made the call. Now I feel like this. Very simple. And if you feel like it at that point in time, if you feel like it, because now you're not going to have all the warnings anymore, go ahead and make a second call. Make as many calls as you want, but don't say 20. That's too big of a burden for you if you have a hard time making calls. I have coached many salespeople for many years. Few have the humility to do what I just told you. Those who do make dials every single day, and it's not painful for them anymore. All the sales training hacks out there of getting really greedy and really aggressive, all that's going to do is turn you into a used car salesman. If you do what I'm telling you right now, you can make calls with ease and feel good about it. But you have to rewire your brain. By the way, your brain may never stop throwing you signals of fear and anxiety because they're normal. It's part of what makes you human. But if you do what I just said, you're going to be dialing with the best of them and never turn into that used car salesman. And you can use this in many things, such as going door to door, such as calling even FSBOs and expires. And even when the worst thing happens, like someone yells at you, curses at you, and hangs up the phone, afterwards you're going to go, all right, I got yelled at and cursed at. It felt like this, but you know what? That wasn't as bad as I thought. Now, when we're not in the moment, hear me on this, very, very important. When we're not in the moment, we're able to be that rational. Right now, you're probably thinking to yourself, yeah, I already knew it wasn't that bad, but I still don't want to do it anyway. You have to understand how EQ works. You have to do this exercise in the moment. I can tell you a perfect workout, but when I'm I'll use myself as an example. I just started a new workout plan yesterday. I can tell you how it works with the best of them. But my form, when I was actually in the workout, was pretty pitiful. My ability to engage that and do that perfectly, even though I understood it in the moment, was pretty pitiful. So just going back and watching videos and all the moves over and over again, it's helpful, but what I really need is I need to do something in the moment to get better. I need to focus on my form. I need to slow down and be attentive in the moment. That's where the brain is rewired during the exercise. So you need to go back on your cold calling. You need to go back and look at your plan, whether it's networking, door knocking, any prospecting, and hopefully you're calling people right now during COVID-19 and building a bond with them and making a ton of calls to engage with people, even if they're not ready to buy or sell right now. I hope you're engaging with a ton of people and building your list. More on that here at the end. And if you are, or if you're struggling to do that, The exercise I just gave you is going to eliminate that distraction. And you should be making 20 calls a day right now at a minimum. But be careful to hear that and go, okay, 20 is now my new thing. You need to employ many habits. I just want you to make one call. Honestly, if you were afraid of making no calls and now you're able to make one, huge success has happened to rewiring your brain. Huge success. But you have to not just do it white knuckling it. That's not going to rewire your brain. You have to identify the emotion, identify the triggers, and then afterwards, remember, STAR technique, assess, respond, and then review. We're going to assess the situation, we're going to respond, make the dial, and we're going to review. The review is very important. It wasn't as bad as I thought. I actually feel good. Let's do another one. Hopefully you see how that works. That is the biggest takeaway any salesperson can honestly have from the motivation thing. And of course, true accountability helps too. True accountability is nothing more than cutting off the hand that offends, right? If your hand causes you to do something wrong, you cut it off. If ice cream's causing you to offend, you get rid of it when you're motivated. That said, when the trigger comes up, I'm laying on my couch, I've got no ice cream in the house, the desire comes for ice cream, you can't just go, well, it's not here, I'm fine. Even then, you need to still do the emotional intelligence exercise. So even when you don't feel like making calls, you need to say, oh, anytime the trigger presents itself. It could be a Saturday morning and all of a sudden you get a repulsion from cold calling. And you go, well, I don't have to worry about it right now. I'm not cold calling. That's actually dangerous. You're justifying the emotion and you're putting it to bed saying, well, I don't need to do it right now. Guys, that's the very root of procrastination. The very root of procrastination is saying, I don't have to deal with this right now. It justifies the trigger. It tells that emotional trigger, you were right, but it's not a threat right now. That doesn't handle the threat. When the trigger comes up, even if you plan on procrastinating, you still need to deal with the emotional trigger in a positive way by saying, I hear you, I'm triggered by this, I feel this, but in reality, re-educate the trigger. In reality, this is how that makes me feel. It really does. And sometimes the best way to do that is to take an action to re-educate the emotional trigger. All right. So we're going to go really fast here through these next two components. We've covered self-awareness, scratch the surface, so we've covered it, self-regulation, motivation. Now we're going to get into empathy and compassion. We're moving now away from stuff that just deals with us, putting the oxygen mask on ourselves, and we're moving to how we put the oxygen mask on other people. Empathy is about others. So empathy is defined as the ability to identify with and deeply understand or even feel the wants, needs, and viewpoints or the emotions of those around you. So empathetic people understand how other people feel. It's really easy. It's just, I get how you feel. And the better you can do that, the more empathetic you are. That's all it means, okay? Now, I've added to this compassion. I've added that. You're not going to find that in an emotional intelligence book that I'm aware of. The reason why I've added that is I think empathy is limited. Empathy is limited, meaning I can sit in my living room and feel sorry and even feel the pain and suffering of people all around the world. But I need to do something about it. Compassion is caring enough to actually help those in need. So empathy and compassion work wonderfully together synergistically. The more I can actually understand how you feel, the more compassionate I tend to be. It can also backfire on us. Not compassion, but empathy. Sometimes I can understand how someone feels so much that I actually don't feel compassion for them. Here's what I mean. I understand intimately why some people are aggravated about certain situations in their life, okay? I'll try to use an example that doesn't involve a political opinion or something. Let's say you grew up with parents who just didn't really mentor you or really, they cared about you, but maybe they just didn't really mentor you or spend time. Maybe they were just really so soaked up in their own lives that they never really spent the time with you that they should have, okay? Let's say I perfectly empathize with that person, and that person really has a resentment towards their parents. And I really empathize to the point where I have a resentment towards their parents too. That's not good. Why? Because resentments aren't good. I can't pull you out of the muck if I jump in the muck to the point where I'm stuck too. So we need to be able to empathize to the point where we can feel where they're at, but we also have to go to a point where we understand beyond empathy, which means Here's a better place, and I'm going to help them get there. Again, empathy is a great way to be able to reach into the muck because I understand what the muck is like. I can meet you where you are. Empathy is meeting them where they are. Compassion is really driving them out of it. So in short, as I have here in the notes, empathy is feeling what others feel. Compassion is caring enough to help. So let's grow here quickly in empathy. We're going to go through this really fast. So typically when I do this training, people come to me and say, at least honest people will come to me and say, I'm not as compassionate as I should be, or I'm not as compassionate as I want to. And the first thing I say is, congratulations, you're growing in self-awareness. That's helpful. I'm not as compassionate as I want to be either. Compassion isn't a natural response of my heart. I'm not saying that I hate the human race or anything like that, but I'm not a person who my first thought is, let me just help everyone. I'm not altruistic at all. I'm compassionate about some things, but I'm not an altruist. I'm not compassionate about all situations, not naturally. I'm just being honest with you. So how do I become more compassionate? Well, it's kind of like what we were talking about before. Well, how do I feel motivated? How do I not feel angry? It's not so simple as just choosing not to. So just like with the other, this is why it's a part of emotional intelligence, just like with the other things, we're going to grow in compassion by doing compassionate things. The cart comes before the horse. So the person that comes up to me and says, Thom, I don't want to yell at my wife, or I don't want to yell at my kids, but I say, okay, you care about them. Yes. Do you want to care to the point where you never yell at them? Of course I do. Then we need to start practicing that compassion. We actually have to start self-regulating. We need to remind ourselves of our core values, of our compassions. You've heard a lot of people talk about how much gratitude lists in the morning have changed their lives. What are they doing? Guys, they're practicing self-regulation. They were already grateful for those things before they made the silly list. But the process of actually writing those things down and feeling it again, empathizing with themselves, being compassionate for those things on the list, actually resulted in an increase in compassion and empathy. You have to do the same thing. Before the moment, you actually have to go through and be compassionate. Again, back to meditation. You have to spend time considering other people. Don't just say, well, in my heart I do. That's not enough. And if you've ever sat with someone dying, I'm sorry to make this heavy, but if you've ever sat with someone dying, you've been able to experience this. Some people in their last few moments of life are filled with regrets. Now, in their heart, they say, I always intended A, but I did B. Why? Because intentions that aren't built upon end up in wrong actions. And this is a part of the empathy part of emotional intelligence. It's saying my rational brain, my heart, if you will, says, I want to help others, but I'm not doing it. Stop and ask why. Well, I don't care enough. Okay, stop and ask why. And then we're going to self-regulate. We're actually going to do things. We're going to meditate on things. We're going to do things that actually make us more compassionate. Sometimes, to use the adage that I don't like, but it does apply, it's kind of a little bit of fake it till you make it. You're not faking it because you're doing what you intend to do. But you have to give yourself a break. The compassion will come as you act compassionately. And there's words you can use. Even though you might not be feeling it in the moment, you can say, I appreciate why you feel this way. I can understand why you are doing this. So let's just put this in the context of real estate. You're sitting with someone, they were a great customer up until this point that we're putting in the offer. They seem to be really nice. Now we put in the offer, and now they're acting like a crazy person. Why? Because they're afraid. They're afraid they're not going to get the house. They're afraid they're going to spend too much money. They're afraid of all of these things, and all of a sudden, all that fear is causing them to act irrationally. What you can do using this is you can say, I understand why they're feeling this way. Instead of saying, don't worry, that's what we tend to do. Don't worry, it's going to be fine. We try to calm them. And instead, we need to meet them where they're at. We need to say, before we tell them it's going to be okay, guys, we've got to say, I can appreciate why you would be concerned. I can appreciate your anxieties. That's empathy. Then, and only then, are you able to say, would it be all right if I made a couple of suggestions of where we go from here? They go, sure. Now they're ready to hear rationally. You say, well, here's why I think you're actually going to be okay. And then you assure them. We have got to stop, as optimistic real estate agents, we have got to stop telling everyone's going to be fine. We've got to start empathizing first, meeting them where they're at, getting them rational by asking them to consider, would it be all right if I gave you a suggestion? They say yes, and then rationally and calmly explains to them why things are going to be fine. Telling people not to worry, telling people everything's going to be okay, it's a heartfelt encouragement, but it's a very ineffective one. Empathy and compassion uses different language. And the more we can practice this, the better leaders we become, the better parents we become, better spouses we become. And you've got to be emotionally intelligent in the moment to be able to do this. That's the key. You've got to be the person who has already gotten in what's called the approach state first. And I always like to say, remember the Grinch, because it was as the Grinch considered and began responding that his heart grew 3 sizes larger. If you want to be more compassionate, you want to be a better leader, you want to have more caring approach to people, this is how it works. All right, the last one here is social skills. Oops. Slides are so fancy, I screwed them up. Social skills. So people with well-developed social skills are able to work within teams, they excel at communication, and they develop meaningful relationships. We get that. So how do they do it? A great tool for that is the DISC behavior language. It's a way to nicely categorize extroverts and introverts, and task-oriented people and people-oriented people. So I have a lot of training on my YouTube channel on DISC. If you go there, I have a playlist on it. You can watch about 20 minutes of videos and have a good understanding of the DISC behavior language. Forcing yourself to engage in social settings as a way to practice, and kind of and practice is what professional athletes do. If you want to grow in social skills, which has to do with your emotional state, your anxieties, your angers, your reactions, we do that by going into a practice field. So I tell my clients this: put on your training hat, force yourself into a networking group for this one sole purpose, to identify your triggers and your emotions so you can come back out and assess and respond. Why would I do that? Well, the same way I make my clients make cold calls. I don't have you make cold calls so you can practice a script. I don't have you make calls to your former clients asking for referrals just so you'll get referrals. I want you to develop the emotional intelligence around it. So you first start making calls and you start asking questions like, how do I feel? Why do I feel that way? What were my triggers? How should I respond? All right, let me try that now again and start reprogramming things. The minute you start taking your training and not just thinking of a quick and clever way to respond, and start instead thinking of emotional intelligence first and engaging that way, that's how you're going to become the master realtor. That's how you're going to become the master leader. That's how you're going to become the master cold caller. That's how you're going to become the master networker, is by coming at it first and saying, let me look at my own self. What my triggers are, how I'm feeling, and why I'm not responding. And then how to make the right jump shot starts to come together, guys. I very rarely tell people things they don't understand. This is what they're lacking. And it's all about keeping your eyes on those other people and judging yourself in the mirror of how they are responding. So some of you are asking for a recorded version of this, and we are recording this, so that will be available. And active listening is a great way to do this. Now, I know I've been talking a lot here. This has ended up being a lot more of a lecture, just doing this online. We don't get the interaction I normally would enjoy, but hopefully you're taking some notes and seeing some things you can engage with. So let's kind of land the plane here, okay? So you have 2 states in emotional intelligence. If you do everything we've been talking about, you tend to stay in the approach state. The approach state is that place where you're acting in the best of integrity, where your character and your responses are in line with your core values. And that resonates with other people. What that causes is what I call the leadership presence principle, okay? That means when you simply come around people, they instantly feel a certain way. Like Pavlov's dogs drooled when they heard a bell, your presence becomes one that you simply walk around your spouse and they get calm. You walk around your kids and they feel safe. The approach state is what we're looking for, and that happens when we remain emotionally intelligent. Doesn't mean we're not emotional. It just means we are acting as we should. We're regulated. The avoid state has the same effect. So what you need to understand is that as you stay in an avoid state, not emotional intelligence, you're actually conditioning the world around you as well as conditioning yourself. Just like the athlete who trains every day conditions their responses, the emotionally intelligent realtor who is conditioning themselves every day is conditioning their responses and the responses of those around them. From the very first conversation and on, from the moment you wake up and on. All right. So we're all here about becoming a great leader, becoming a great realtor, becoming a great salesperson, great entrepreneur. So I'm going to leave you with this last exercise. If those of you who are still awake, because I haven't had you interact for almost 45 minutes here, if you're still awake, what I'd have you do is go into the chat, and this is what I want you to type. What is one self-regulating activity that you know you should do, but you often forego in the morning, right? So maybe you're the type of person that says, when I wake up in the morning and I take a walk, I feel a lot better and my day goes better because I'm in the approach state. And maybe you've always said, I should do that, but I don't get around to it because I react to the busyness of the day instead. What I'm trying to get you to do is try to shake you awake, try to sober you up to the fact that if you don't self-regulate proactively, you are giving in. You are surrendering to the animal within, whether it's a fight or flight animal. So one of the easiest things you can take away from this training today is becoming completely convinced that you must self-regulate before you walk out of your house. So I see you guys are filling up the chat right now, saying meditation, exercise, prayer, giving thanks, all excellent things you can do. Hear me on this. You must do it. No more excuses. To walk. Here's the problem. Well, Tom, I've walked out the door without doing that so many times and I live to see another day. That's a lack of self-awareness. Just because you got away with it, what happened? You conditioned yourself in the opposite direction of where you want to be. And now you're further from it than ever. It's like not going to the gym. We go, well, I don't want to go to the gym unless it's the perfect workout program. If you had just worked out 30 minutes a day, every day for the past 10 years, think where I'd be, think where you'd be. We've got to stay conditioning our emotions. We've got to continue these practices. Now, on top of this, you've got the morning. See, the British have tea time for a reason. You've got that morning time. You've got what my wife calls the witching hour. About 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we kind of ran out of that gas. So most of us have to pull aside and refuel about 3 o'clock in the afternoon every day. So I suggest you put 15 minutes on the calendar for that. Also, before you go into any sort of change of environment. So, for example, I pull into my house. When there's a driveway, I'm going from being entrepreneur to being father and husband. I've got to take 2 or 3 minutes there to reset and prepare, have a little short emotional intelligence talk with myself, rewire my brain. The more you do this, the more it happens naturally. We've got to stop thinking we're conditioned because one time we were. How many people have you heard tell you, yeah, I used to work out like crazy, and they still think they're that athlete from 20 years ago, and you look at them and you go, buddy, you ain't that athlete anymore. I don't care if at one time you were able to get through something. Emotional intelligence is a daily conditioning. We have got to start being humble and self-aware of how much work this really takes. All right, as I land the plane here, some of you are typing some of those practices that you need to do in the chat. If you're willing to share that with others, that would be great. Most of you are. Learn from each other on this. Learn from each other on this. This is a constant practice. Anyone have any questions? Please type that into the chat or into the Q&A. Then I will see it. All right, Teresa is asking for my email. I will type that answer, and I'll also answer live. My email is Thom with an H, Thom, at strongholdtraining.com. You can also just go to strongholdtraining.com and schedule appointments with me there. All right. Let's see if there's any other questions here. I'll give you guys a second. This is a lot to take in. I know a lot of you see that now. Here's what you need to do, because it's a lot. You need to look over your notes. You need to maybe jot a couple notes if you haven't, and you need to say, what are 1 to 2 takeaways that I can begin implementing? You don't need to say, I need to get all this. That's an overachiever tendency. Don't say, I need to get all of this. What you need to say is, what's 1 or 2 things? 1 or 2 things I can take away from this, and then no matter what, make these 2 hours worth it. It changed your life because you did that one thing walking out of this, and it will start snowballing. It's okay to just pick up one thing. It's not okay to pick up none. It's not okay to just think we know better. We've got to prove it in our actions. All right, with that, we've got 5 or 6 minutes here. I'm just going to sit here quietly, and if you have any questions, type them into the Q&A or the chat, and I will answer them. Otherwise, for the rest of you, this has been enjoyable. I'm glad it was beneficial to many of you as you're typing in here. And you know, I do a lot of classes at Pro. I do at least 2 a month. So if you're a member of Pinellas Realtor Organization, just look for the PROCoach trainings. Those are all me. Pinellas Realtor Organization has a program called PROCoach. I've got some really specific real estate trainings on my website. Just go to strongholdtraining.com and click on real estate. It's there. My YouTube channel has a ton of stuff. My Facebook channel has a ton of stuff. So just go to the Stronghold Training page. And then, of course, you could always schedule time with me. So as I offered at the break, if you're just really suffering right now from a ton of anxiety, you're just really going through a lot, you can't even think through your business at all, I'm happy to have a free 15-minute call with you and do my best to try to work through that with you. And then some of you are asking for the handouts. Yep, so I will get an email list from Angela at Pro. And what I typically do is within a day or two of this training is I email out the recording and the slides. So you'll have all of that to look over. Some people are raising their hands. Let me see if I can figure out how to call on them. If you type in the Q&A, oh, here we go. I can allow you to talk. So Douglas raised his hand. Okay, Douglas, you can talk. Oops, you're muted. Doug, if you unmute, you can talk.
No need. I raised my hand earlier when I signed on. I signed on kind of late.
No worries. If you have any questions, happy to answer. My apologies for not getting to you sooner.
Yeah, no worries.
Rachel, thank you, Doug. Appreciate that. Rachel, if you unmute, you can chat too now. You just have to click unmute. There you are.
I was actually just.
Go ahead. Sorry, Rachel, you're good. Go ahead. All right, we lost Rachel. That's okay. I feel like I'm doing like one of those live call-in shows now. This is great. So this is a Zoom webinar, not just Zoom meeting. So I've got to click on you to be able to get you to be able to share. For the rest of you, any other? Oh, Rachel said just waving. I appreciate that. That's good. Good to see you as well. So again, I have a training called the Predictable Success in Real Estate. Sorry to be a cheap peddler of goods here, but if you're looking for a real systematic way to grow your real estate business, that's on my website. And I also do those classes regularly at Pro. But if you want just kind of an online training where I take you step by step how to grow a strategic marketing plan, to go through that and have a real predictable success plan, I've got that training on my website. It's strongholdtraining.com/real estate. And so I've got more tools there, but I like giving away stuff. So if you go to my YouTube channel, if you want to schedule a call with me, happy to help any way I can. You guys have been fantastic. Love the positive feedback. Positive feedback always makes me feel good. But what makes me feel best is hearing testimonies of how you took something that we talked about here, implemented it, it worked, and you're continuing to use it. That's what I want you to do. So don't let this be feel good. Let it be action oriented. And I look forward to seeing you guys and hearing those testimonies on our next training. Thank you so much.